Hey you guys, it's Peter, and welcome to my channel, Peterisms, where I tell stories of my life and just little things that I've learned as I've grown into the person that I am. Okay, this video is becoming stranger and stranger by the moment. This is about my fourth take on it, because I keep on pulling the wrong props, the wrong albums, and first I didn't know what I was going to make a video about. And so my husband Alex is upstairs listening as I'm filming this video, and I said, hey, what should I make a video about for my Peterisms channel today? And he goes, why don't you make a video about, like running out of time, getting older, because that's something that I talk about often, and I'm getting older. And I also, say that me getting older, I don't really have an issue with like my skin and my hair color and things like that. I have an issue with running out of time to do the things that I want to do in my life. I've talked a lot about that on all my channels. So as I was like, oh, that's a really good idea. Okay, that's what I'll talk about. Because the other day I had talked about how I was listening to the song by Judy Collins called Who Knows Where the Time Goes. And I have the album right here, Who Knows Where the Time Goes. And this is Judy Collins, the best of Judy Collins' Colors of the Day. The song originally came out, I think it was in 1968. I just looked it up, 1968, and the album was called Who Knows Where the Time Goes. And it was originally sung by, because somebody corrected me and they were right, and if you go and you listen to her live version of this, which was like probably 10 years ago, I have it all downloaded, every song on there, I love it. She talks in there about how she found this song, and that originally her producer brought it to her when she was at the Chateau Marmont, and it was being sung by Sandy Denny of Fairport Convention. And she goes in there and she talks about they were beautiful singers and all this kind of stuff, and that they're still performing today. And it's just like this really cool moment when you listen to the song. She kind of talks about it, And the song is really about like running out of time, and you look back on your life and it's like, what happened? It's like 1 second you're 16 and you're saying to your friends, like, we're never going to be 30, and then you're 30 and you're like, okay, this is the best years of my life. I don't really feel that old. And then you're 35 and you're like, okay, I should be doing this and I should be doing that. And then you're 45 and you're like, I don't give a shit about that, and I don't give a shit about this, those things I should have done. I don't care about those things anymore. I want to do the things that mean something to me, And I'm not in my 50s yet, but I remember when my mom, she got sober at 51, and she said to me, we were talking one time, and she said, she goes, in your 20s, you're just kind of reckless, and you're going to college, and, you're building your career and dating and stuff like that. And she said, then in your 30s, you're settling down. And she said, and then in your 40s, she said, you're kind of like growing up, and usually your 40s are like the best years of your life. She goes, but let me tell you a little secret. She goes, truthfully, the 50s are the best years of your life. She said, you have enough money typically that you can do what you want to do. She goes, you're wise enough and old enough that you don't give a shit what anybody else has to say, and you're just kind of living your best life. And she really enjoyed her 50s. My mom was 64 when she passed away, but she loved her 50s. And she would always say, that was when, it was funny because up till that point, like, people would always give my mom gifts, okay, like clothing gifts. And her friends would give her things that were like sweater vests, because she was a teacher for many, many years. Sweater vests that had like hearts on it for Valentine's Day, or, something like that, or like, Christmas earrings and a necklace. And my mother did not like that stuff. She hated it, okay? And my mother was somebody that she loved style. I got my, adoration for style and all that kind of stuff came from my mother, because I was growing up, and I mean to tell you, in our house was always the fashion magazines, and Vogue, Cosmopolitan's not a fashion magazine, but Elle magazine, and one of my mom's very, very good friends from college, E. Jean Carroll, writes for Elle magazine, and she just was always enamored of that fashion world, and she knew all the designers, and she knew everything. My mother knew everything about them, even though she didn't really wear a lot of that stuff. And it was always her dream to be a costume designer, like Edith Head from back in the day. She wanted to be a costume designer and work for Universal Studios and make, for these epic films like Gone with the Wind and the Alfred Hitchcock movies. My mother would watch Rear Window over and over and over again just because she loved to see Grace Kelly's gowns in that movie. And she has this, this whole idea of just this world that she wanted to have that she never had. She wanted to live on a houseboat in San Francisco Harbor, and she wanted to be a trial attorney. That was one of her dreams. She also wanted to live in New York City and be a writer, and she would reference Sylvia Plath, which I always thought was a weird reference. I'm like, if you've read The Bell Jar, if you guys don't know what I'm talking about, Sylvia Plath is famous for writing the book The Bell Jar, which was autobiographical to some degree, and she ended up suiciding. And her writing is very sad and depressing and talks a lot about that. And my mom would say, I want to move to New York like Sylvia Plath in the bell jar. I'm like, what? But Sylvia Plath, like, it's not her in the bell jar, but the character does move to New York City, and that was Sylvia Plath's story too. And married the, ends up marrying somebody that becomes the poet laureate of the world. And I talk about such random shit on here. It's like, people are like, Peter was like, how do you know? These are the conversations I used to have with my mom, So anyway, what was funny about this video before I started filming it, now, we're having rainstorms and thunderstorms today, and my husband does not believe in anything paranormal whatsoever, but I do. And I'm sitting here in the house, and I was going over there, and I pulled this album out, right? Well, this is the best of, and I know my mom has the original album somewhere, and I'm going through her albums. I couldn't find the original, right? And I'm over there, and I'm like looking for it, because on some of her albums over there, she has stuff written on the back. And this is so funny. I pulled out some of her favorite albums. So Judy Collins, and Simon and Garfunkel. This Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme. This is like the original album, like when it came out, you guys, okay? Like, look at that. That's crazy, isn't it? That this is, my mom bought this album, and Free Will and Bob Dylan, I think, no, this is Nashville Skyline. And Bob Dylan, look at this, $7.99, you guys. Can you imagine? Like, a song on iTunes is like $1.29. That is crazy, isn't it? $7.99. This keeps on like glaring in the window, and I keep on thinking somebody's walking by. I'm telling you, this video is getting spookier and spookier. But this is like glaring in the window, so it's like making. And then this is my favorite Judy Collins album of life, like absolutely. And Judith, isn't she absolutely gorgeous on the cover of that? I mean, look at that. Just makes, I'm using that for my thumbnail. But anyway, I love this album so much, and it has all the lyrics in it inside. And my mom, back when she was drinking, she would sit, and we had a library in the house I grew up in with French doors, and you step down. It was like a library. It was very cool. And she would sit in this leather chair with this ottoman that Alex and I have upstairs, and she would, with headphones on, and she, plugged into the stereo, and she would just sit there and she would drink on days that she was very, very sad. And these are some of my memories growing up as a child that maybe are not happy, but I think are very telling of my mother's soul. And she would sit there, and she would just listen to this album over and over and over again. And she would just drink and smoke one cigarette after another. Interestingly enough, I look at that and I think back on that, and those were the moments that I think, like, I thought of my mother as very real and connected to her as being kind of weirdly glamorous to some degree, And I think that I grew up also with this kind of attraction to desperation and seeing her, sitting there and all this kind of stuff. But some of my favorite songs are on this album, like The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. It's one of my all-time favorite songs of life. And I'm actually using a quote of it in the book that I'm writing right now. And The Lovin' of the Game is in here. Send in the Clowns, which is not one of my favorite Judy Collins songs, honestly. Born to the Breed and Brother Can You Spare a Dime. Some of my favorite songs by Judy Collins, well, excuse me, Both Sides Now is my hands down all-time favorite song. So this has really great songs on it. Someday Soon, Since You Asked, Both Sides Now, Sons of Suzanne, Farewell, Who Knows Where the Time Goes, and I'm going to link the song below if you've never heard it before. My father always promised us that we would live in France. You know that song? Oh. Anyway, Albatross, In My Life, and Amazing Grace. And I remember that song, like, my mom would sing that song. I don't know why I'm getting so emotional about it, but it was weird because then the lights started flashing and the printer went off, and I don't know. Sometimes I just feel her presence around me. Maybe it's just a thunderstorm, who knows. But as you get older, the things that you worry about or you fear as you get older are not the things that happen in your life. Like, you worry about, I don't know, not having enough money, or not being able to do this, or not being able to travel to the places you want to travel. You don't really think, honestly, like, I didn't really ever consciously think. I can remember thinking to myself when I got sober for many, many years, I don't know what I'll do when my parents die. Like, will that be a trigger for me to keep drinking or start drinking again? And it wasn't at all. It was like when my mom got sick and passed away, that was like the last thing on my mind, My aunts passed away, my uncles passed away, and I don't think much about drinking in any of those. I didn't think much about drinking in any of those situations. It was just, that's not how I cope in my life today. But I thought about those things. Like, I would worry about that, but the idea of imagining a parent being gone, or my aunt and uncle being gone, who were such constants in my life, just seemed so far removed from any kind of reality that I could imagine, that until I went through it, I don't really know that I ever truly understood it, if that makes sense. when I was in college, I could only see as far as the next exam. I never really thought about a career outside of college. When I started my career working in the field of addictions, you know, I never thought much further than the next promotion or the next vacation. I really didn't, you know. I've never been someone that's thought 5, 10 years down the road. Now, I do come up with dreams and plans like I've talked about, and like dream life of what I'd like to have and those kinds of things and goals that I want to achieve. But I've really never thought about, you know, well, when I'm 50 or when I'm 60. And in fact, you know, like as far as like even looking at 65, retiring and things like that, I don't think much about that. I live very much in the present. And I guess to some degree, I always really have. And so what happens is one day you just wake up and you're 46 and you're like, how did I get here? You know what I mean? Like, where is, I want to make sure I get the title of the song. Who knows where the time goes? I mean, like, where is the time gone? You know what I mean? Like, that's truly how you feel. Because, and I remember having this conversation with my mother, sitting right here in this condo, drinking coffee, you know? And she said, you wake up one day and it's like, she said, you know what, Peter? Because one of my good friends in high school, her name was Margaret. And she said, it would be like if you woke up and I was screaming upstairs at you, you know, Margaret's here. She's come to pick you up. It's time to go to school. And the whole thing had been a dream and you would believe it because to some degree, it just seems so strange. And it does, you know. My husband and I have been together for 10 years. And he's sitting upstairs listening. My husband and I have been together for 10 years in August, you know, and it seems like so weird. I was thinking about like some of the first years that, you know, I talk on here about marriage counseling a lot, and here we were talking about the first year that we were together in marriage counseling this week. And, you know, it was weird because like some things I remember so clearly and some things I don't remember clearly at all, you know? And I look back on that and I'm like, well, was that how it was? Or what was I thinking? You know what I mean? And our relationship is so different than where it started, and it's been 10 years. So when people ask me, where do you think you'll be in 5 years or 10 years, you know? 2 years ago, I didn't even have a YouTube channel. My life has drastically changed. You know, 5 years ago, I hadn't even started writing a book. You know, 4 years ago, I hadn't even published a book. You know, 10 years ago, I hadn't met my husband yet. So life changes and it evolves. And I think to some degree, it's really not about looking on the past and wondering where the time has gone and getting sad and morose about that, but looking at the present and respecting it and trying your best to stay in the moment. I feel very blessed to like look back on my life and realize that I have lived much of my life since I've gotten sober in the present. I know that when I was using, I worried a lot about what was coming next or what had happened. And they say in sobriety, if you put one foot in the yesterday and 1 foot in tomorrow, you should all over today. And so I think that that's the truth about living in the present. You have to stay here so that you can appreciate what we have today and really know how much it means instead of speculating about the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. But just sitting in the moment, taking a breath and saying, for today, things are good. I love you guys, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.